Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fiction genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Timeless. So in this episode, the team is stuck in 1754 because Flynn's team basically not destroyed, but severely damaged their the lifeboat, or isn't that what theirs is called? I don't remember. I don't know. That might be what Flynn's one is called. But their time machine. Let's just leave it at that. And leaving them stranded there. What I really appreciate about this whole episode is, like, obviously the episode is picking up, like, because what I like, the design of this episode is like they're already on the mission the moment we got to the episode starting, so we kind of get the usual of, like, oh, them being called in, told where to go. We kind of skipped over that because it's like we don't get those extra conversations that we know are there, like, a little bit, like, Rufus telling them about what he discovered last episode, like, oh, the guy that he talked to, the Rittenhouse guy he talked to from last episode is actually the guy that he was talking to back during the whole Watergate thing last episode too. So that was him back then that Rufus was talking to and everything. So stuff like that, just how the whole situation is. I mean, because I guess really that just shows that there was no dialogue between them. They really weren't just talking. They were just kind of like, all right, let's get to it. So the big part of this episode is like them still not trusting each other and everything. And it's like, like Wyatt's just basically putting them both on the outs, and he just kind of tells it, because Rufus is like, okay, I get it. I'm kind of like, I suck at this type of thing. Like, I don't like the outdoors. I'm not much of it. It's like, I'm a cute computer dude, but there's like this outdoor stuff is not me. And Wyatt's like, he's like, you are, Delta Force. He's like, that doesn't mean anything. When it comes to being Delta Force, it's not just me. Delta Force means relying on a team, and it's like, how am I supposed to do that when I can't trust you? Like, to have someone who I really trust to have my back, and it's like, I'm not in that position anymore. At one point in time, I would have thought you both were people I could trust wholeheartedly, but it's like, now that I know you've lied to me, especially because he got a little more agitated because he finds out he knows about Lucy's deal, like, okay, help stop Flynn and everything, help get her sister back, and it's like, you can make that deal. It's like, oh, it's all fine and dandy for you to fix your life, getting your sister back, but this whole time, how I felt about my wife, trying to, like, save my wife Jessica, and it's like, she went as far as calling it fate. So it's kind of like, okay, what's the difference there? It's like, oh, your sister existed, but now she no longer exists. And like, technically the same situation applies to my wife. It's like, my wife existed and now she's gone. So you can save your sister, bring her back into existence, but I can't, there's a difference there because it's like, oh, she was alive and existing, but it's like, it's such a gray area. Like, you can't really 100% justify it because it's being hypocritical, which Lucy kind of calls herself out on it later on in the episode. But, they ended up later on getting captured by because it's like during the Indian War? I forgot what it was, but they ended up getting caught by a tribe, and they met the chief, who was a lady. Instantly, my brain, because I'm an idiot, just instantly was like, oh, is this kind of like real life Pocahontas or something like that? And it's like, oh no, kind of about to say, oh, Wyatt could be like her John Smith. I don't know. It's been years since I've seen Pocahontas, so I don't remember it that well. But nevertheless, it's like, she was about to kill them all because it's just kind of like, it's like French or British, it doesn't matter. You're kind of all the same, because to them it's like, they've come here, they've killed our men, women, and it's like, it's kind of like, we're done believing that they're here to help. Because I love the fact is that Lucy goes like, I'm Quinn, the medicine woman, and you see Rufus go, kind of shake it, lower his head, just like, oh God, I can't believe you just said that. Granted, I'm not that familiar with that show. I've seen bits of it. I've seen, like, I'm aware of the show. I've never actually watched it. So, but luckily it was kind of Rufus that was able to get them out of that situation, because he was like, no, please. Okay, I know this won't make sense to you, but we weren't telling you the truth. We're not from around here. He's like, these people, like, I'm not, because she originally let him go because it's like, obviously you're in a similar situation, you were captured. Because I was wondering, because it's like, Wyatt and Lucy both had black marks, but he had a red mark on his head, so I was like, okay, so they're letting him go, because it's like, at that time, it's like, oh, it's slavery, so it's like, oh, obviously you weren't brought here of your own fruition, it was kind of like, you were kind of brought here, but he was like, no, these circumstances are different, they're my friends, and it's like, I might not be able to stop you, so you're going to kill them, and I might not be able to stop you, but if that's going to be the case, you might as well kill me too, because I'm not going to, rather go down with his friends. And then she has a conversation with her brother. She's like, my brother said I should just kill you all, but me, he's like, nah. The fact is, what, Rufus did showed courage, so she's like, for his sake, I'm going to like spare you all. So that was kind of cool. It worked out like that. And I also had Rufus kind of going all little like blacksmithy and everything, fixing, like getting, I'm not even going to explain what he was doing. He's basically making a capacitor, not a flux capacitor, because they don't exist, you know. Because that was just kind of why it's intimidating. It was like, oh, you capacitor, oh, flux capacitor. It's like, that's kind of, you know, it's close, you know, you pull from what knowledge you know. It's like, hey, he knows Back to the Future, so it's kind of like going pull from that knowledge. But it was kind of neat that he was able to do that. Because what I love about this whole like situation is like kind of deviating from it a little bit to kind of break some things apart. Like, I don't think it was just some random act that it ended up leaving them in 1754. You could argue it's like, okay, they did that because it was a means of keeping them off their trail for a little while so they can go off and be a little bit ahead. But I'm thinking, because it kind of got brought up in this episode, Lucy's journal. I'm thinking that that moment was something that was written in Lucy's journal, so they played it out that way because they needed to have that experience because that experience brought them back together. So maybe Lucy was like, hey, put us in that situation because this putting us there makes us a stronger team, which means we go forward and eventually down the road, I write this book. Because that comes a big concern for her at the end of the episode, which I kind of, you know, since I'm on the subject, I'll talk about. But it's like, what does she do about the whole journal situation? Because she's like, for the longest time, she didn't believe it was her journal, but now she does. And she brings up the question, it's like, how does she feel about fate? Because she actually brings up the fact that she is kind of spiritual, because she's like, she always thought there was kind of a higher power that decided everything, but it's, you know, and it's like, you know, if there is such thing as fate, that everyone has a purpose, that everyone's supposed to end up a certain place, that you're supposed to be here to do this and do that, it's like, does that mean she's bound to write that journal? Which, why it's kind of talking her out of it is like, take a sip of that drink. Now, were you predestined to take that drink, or did you take that drink because you want to? It's like, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. That's what time is. Choices. History is the choices we make, you know? Not all of them good. I mean, he doesn't go into that detail, but the thing is, not all choices are good, not all choices are bad. But the fact is, you have to make a choice. You don't want that whole situation with Flynn to play out, then follow a different path. You do things differently. Write a different journal. It's like I said, that's why I'm wondering, like, if it's kind of like an endless cycle of just kind of like, the best comparison I can think of is like the Doctor Who episode, like a Doctor Who episode of, it was like the first introduction of like the reboot. It was like season 3 with the Weeping Angels, right? The fact of the matter is just a whole situation of the Doctor and Martha, and they ended up kind of like basically the main characters of that episode, which weren't the Doctor and Martha, they were kind of side characters in the episode, but the main people that were dealing with the Weeping Angels, they ended up leaving a message for the Doctor and Martha that would eventually go back to them and leave them a message explaining everything. So I brought this up last time and it got super convoluted, but that's the best way I can explain. The message begets the message. It's like, oh, this one thing led to this one thing happening, which led to that first thing. 1 leads to 2 and 3 leads to 1, like putting it in like a spiral circle. So it's like, you know, maybe it has to work out that way because it's like there is good that comes from doing it like that or something. Or maybe legitimately it's a cycle that has to be broken. It's kind of like, once again, another time travel thing, 12 Monkeys, where it's like Ramsey was supposed to die. That's how things were supposed to play out. But then it's like, oh no, like it changed. Everything changed. Cole went back to say Ramsey type of situation where it's like, everything is kind of set in stone, supposed to be this way, but then like all of a sudden, boom, everything changes. So I know I'm kind of deviating a lot, but that was just kind of my mindset on that. I thought that was just kind of interesting. And I also love the fact is that when Rufus and them were tied up, and he's just like, if just one thing I could, it'd be chocodiles. And they're like, what the hell are chocodiles? It's, you know, Twinkies covered in chocolate, which I love that moment. It just kind of broke the tension. It's just kind of like they had been so mad at each other and now they're just kind of okay. I mean, really, it's more so Wyatt mad at them. I think Lucy and Rufus are kind of okay with each other, but still, it kind of eased the tension. So I appreciate that. Another balance in this episode was kind of like, oh crap, because they're trapped. And I love that. I love that though, because Lucy even herself says it's like, Mason's got this big company, super rich and everything. Probably got access to a lot of technology and stuff like that. Yet his protocol is simply taking a note, putting it in a certain capsule, not a really special capsule, digging it in a hole and leaving it for them to basically unbury, like 200 plus years later. And it's like, that's what that all came down to. Is like, really? I mean, because it ended up sucking because when they actually unearthed it and everything, which kind of pulling the Homeland Security element, they're like, oh yeah, there's like some mosquitoes around. You might want to clear the neighborhood a little bit. So that was kind of cool. I was like, how are you going to explain digging up someone's backyard? I was hoping, I was like, oh, I thought one of the people walking, I was, oh, is that the neighbor? It's like, oh, then everyone's clear. I mean, is that the homeowner? And it's like, oh no, everyone's cleared out. But by the time they get the note and pull it out, because the capsule had cracked, the note had degraded. So that sucked. And then there were 2 words on it, death and millennium. It kind of, I was like, oh, what does that mean? It took me a little while, and I was like, oh my God. I was like, how did the Death Star and the Millennium Falcon. Now, the exact reference he used, the kind of analogy he used, I didn't get it. Because why? I know it's sacrilegious. I don't know the Star Wars movies like that. Even the originals, even what's considered like the good Star Wars movie, because people have problems with the prequels. I didn't have a problem with them, but it's just like, I don't hold Star Wars in my heart like most people. So I'm just saying some of it kind of, I knew what the Death Star was, and I know what the Millennium Falcon was. That's why I kind of got it a little bit, especially when she started bringing out Star Wars and Star Trek. I was like, right. I was like, I'm surprised it took her a little while to kind of it click for her, but it was just kind of like, and that kind of another thing in this episode was kind of the Gia and Rufus relationship. Cause we ended up finding out a little bit more, like after that little date, wasn't that back in like the first episode, first or second episode, he asked Gia out. Apparently, nothing's really come about subsequently. They ended up talking about, it's like, yeah, it was like super awkward and everything. And that Rufus will he won't talk to her directly. He'll message her, even though their desks are like right next to each other. And that's the only communication they have. And it's just kind of like, she's worried because it's kind of like, what if Rufus doesn't come back? And he's worried because he's like, I should have taken the opportunity to ask her out when I had the chance. Because that's the thing, like, that was kind of another focus of this episode. You don't know how things will play out. You don't know how much time you have left. You look at Wyatt's case, it's like him and Jessica, she kept talking about how she always wanted a little boy, but he's like, no, we got time. And it's like, sadly, they didn't. It's just crazy. But getting back to it, Gia and Rufus kind of like they had that awkward moment where it's like she walked up to him, but even she couldn't find the words to say. It was actually Rufus who actually said, "Look," I was like, "Oh, is he going to break the mold and actually say something?" He's like, "Gia," and he probably was like, "Oh man, Rufus, come on." And he's like, "Okay, can you tell Mason, remind me to tell Mason that he needs to find a better containment?" And then they make out, and it's like, yes, okay. So that I'm just glad that worked out like that, but also in this episode, with the conversation Mason had with the Rittenhouse guy, he was like, oh, what about lost contact with Lucy? He's like, you know what I noticed? Lately, you just been constantly bringing up the fact that it's Lucy. He's like, now, I am curious why out of everybody you chose Lucy. Just out of all the historian people you could have chose, why her specifically? He's like, Mason's picking it, like piecing it together, like, okay, there's something there. But then you also have like the Homeland Security agent. She overhears him like, oh, who is that you're talking to? It's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's like, and she's like, yeah, get our team back together. She kind of nudges that towards him and then walks away. Like later on when they were getting the capsule and everything, she even talks to someone later on. It's like, I want you to look into Mason. She's like, why? The guy's like, why? Because he's hiding something. And it's like, ooh, that's gonna come back to bite you in the ass. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, because the last episode I wasn't sure because I was kind of rushing things, and I was like, because I looked at the actor, I was thinking like the guy that's her biological dad is the Rittenhouse guy. I think it is. It looked like it was him, but I don't know. So, but I mean, this episode kind of cements it more. Maybe I'll look back on the episode and be like, oh, that definitely isn't the same guy. So I was right to kind of be hesitant at first, but it does seem like it is a guy. So that's the reason why he chose her specifically for this, because maybe this whole thing is kind of like I said. Because that's right. I brought that up last episode because we found out that Rittenhouse is kind of a lineage thing. That's why she's a part of this, because they want her help to kind of like stop Flynn so that Rittenhouse can stay in power, keep going, because eventually the torch is going to be passed down to Lucy. Like I said, it does make you wonder, does her mom know about any of this stuff? Is that why she's hesitant to keep... is that why she's trying to keep Lucy away from her dad, maybe? Or maybe her mom is completely oblivious to all that stuff. He did talk to someone, but maybe the person he talked to last episode, he's like, oh, you won't guess who showed up at my door? Maybe that was someone else. Like, I mean, maybe it was like someone amongst the group in Rittenhouse that he was talking to on the other line, be like, oh, guess my daughter popped up. Like I said, this could be complete BS, because I might eventually look back and be like, oh wait, that is two different actors. It's not the same guy. It looked like it might be, but maybe I'm completely wrong, and I'm gonna feel like a dummy in both episodes, because I was definitely bewildered last episode, wondering like, was that the same guy? I DVR Timeless too, so I should take the opportunity, like, is that the same actor? I could have taken the time to do that, but I didn't, so that's 100% my fault. Nevertheless, a very good episode. I saw a little bit of next week's episode, not going too far into it. Just saying to anyone that is curious, it deals with the moon landing, so that's going to be very cool to see how that all plays out. Like I said, it's like a very differently structured episode, because it's like not often do you kind of get to bounce back to the present, like focus on stuff happening in the present. Usually that happens before or after the time travel, not kind of during the time where they're stuck in. Them being trapped. And like I said, it also began with them already there. I was halfway expecting, it's like, oh, we start them there, and then we go like, okay, 12 hours earlier or something, kind of revisit. But it's like, no, it picked up like right with them getting captured and continued on. So I thought that was pretty neat. Kind of threw my expectations out the window, because I was halfway expecting it to go, okay, rewind and show it. I was like, oh, we're not getting that because that doesn't exist for this. So nevertheless, still a pretty good episode, and I'm very interested to see how everything plays out. Like I said, like, it's to the point that everyone knows. They know everything. They know about the journal. They know about Rittenhouse and the recordings and stuff like that. So, like I said, Wyatt's biggest problem in this episode was just kind of like, he didn't trust Rufus and whatnot, so he kept throwing away the recording device. So I'm sure in the future he's going to be more, except just like that was him kind of lashing out a little bit because of just the realization about everything. So I guess for now on, that means they're going to have to be a little bit more careful about what they say, because as he said, is like he can't keep dropping these over and over again. Like Mason's eventually going to figure it out, and definitely the Rittenhouse guys are going to eventually figure it out. But that's really all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.